For as long as he could remember, Thomas had followed the same path. Wake up early, go to work, come home, eat a quiet dinner alone, and go to sleep. Rinse and repeat. His world was built on numbers, spreadsheets, budgets, bank balances. He was an accountant, and he approached his own life the same way he approached his clients' finances, with discipline, caution, and an obsessive focus on the future. Every extra dollar was funneled into savings. Vacations were unnecessary expenses. Dining out was frivolous. Buying a new book was a luxury he could postpone. There would be time for all of that later, he told himself. First, he needed to build a secure foundation. First, he needed to save enough. Then, when the numbers were right, when the time was perfect, he would finally start living. Years passed this way. Thomas watched colleagues take trips to Europe, buy houses, start families. He attended their going-away parties and their retirement gatherings, always offering a warm smile and a polite congratulations. Inside, he felt a quiet twinge of something he couldn't name, not quite envy, but a vague sense that he was standing still while the world moved around him. Still, he reassured himself with his growing savings account. That was his security. That was his freedom, waiting to be claimed. He just needed a little more time. Then came the evening that shattered everything. Thomas was driving home from work, rehearsing a conversation he planned to have with his bank about adjusting his investment portfolio. It was raining, a soft drizzle that made the streetlights glow and the asphalt shine. He stopped at a red light, his mind already at home, already calculating. He never saw the truck. The driver, rushing home himself, ran the red light at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Thomas's car crumpled like paper. The world became a deafening scream of metal, a violent spin, and then nothing but darkness. He woke up in a hospital bed, days later, his body a landscape of bandages and pain. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. The recovery would be long, months of physical therapy, possibly longer. Thomas lay in that sterile room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the beep and hum of machines keeping him alive. At first, his mind did what it always did. It calculated. The medical bills. The time off work. The hit to his savings. But as the days dragged on, as the pain became a familiar companion, his thoughts began to drift somewhere else entirely. He thought about all the sunsets he had never watched because he was working late. He thought about the ocean, which he had seen only in photographs. He thought about the conversations he never had, the friendships he never nurtured, the simple human connections he had traded for the cold comfort of a growing bank balance. He had spent his entire life preparing to live, and in doing so, he had forgotten to actually live at all. The money he had so carefully hoarded was meaningless here, in this hospital bed. It couldn't speed his recovery. It couldn't warm the loneliness that settled over him in the quiet hours of the night. It couldn't buy back a single moment of the life he had let slip through his fingers. The realization was not dramatic. It did not arrive with a thunderclap or a sudden flood of tears. It came quietly, like a truth he had always known but refused to acknowledge. When he finally left the hospital, months later, walking with a slight limp and a new appreciation for the simple act of breathing fresh air, Thomas knew he could not go back to the way things were. The old life was over. Something new had to begin. His first act of rebellion against his former self was to book a trip. Not a practical trip, not a carefully researched, budget-optimized excursion. He chose a small coastal town he had once seen in a magazine, a place called Saltwind Cove. He knew nothing about it except that it had blue water and white sand. It was enough. Packing his bag felt strange and exhilarating. He had owned the suitcase for years, but had never used it. He packed lightly, impulsively, throwing in clothes better suited for leisure than for any purpose he could name. The drive to the airport was a journey into the unknown. The airplane ride, his first, terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. He pressed his face to the window like a child, watching the world shrink below him into a patchwork of fields and clouds. Saltwind Cove was everything he had hoped for and nothing he could have imagined. The air tasted of salt. The sound of the waves was a constant, gentle rhythm that seemed to slow his very heartbeat. He spent his days doing nothing that could be called productive. He walked along the shore, letting the cold water wash over his feet. He sat on a weathered bench and watched the sun descend into the ocean, painting the sky in colors he didn't know existed. He ate at a small cafe where the owner remembered his name by the second day and asked about his recovery. He talked to strangers, fishermen, shopkeepers, a young couple on their honeymoon, and discovered that these brief, unguarded connections were a kind of wealth he had never understood. One evening, watching the sunset from a rocky outcrop, Thomas thought about all the years he had wasted waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for enough money. Waiting for security that never truly arrived because life, by its very nature, is insecure. The accident had taught him a brutal lesson. The perfect time is a myth. There is only now. There is only this breath, this moment, this sunset that will never come again. When Thomas finally returned home, he was not the same man who had left. His apartment felt smaller, emptier. But his mind was full. He started saying yes to things he would have once refused. A weekend hiking trip with a colleague. A cooking class. A spontaneous dinner invitation. He still worked, still paid his bills, still kept an eye on his finances. But money was no longer his master. It was simply a tool, a means to an end, and the end was a life rich with moments, not possessions. Thomas knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be setbacks, difficult days, moments of doubt. But he also knew, with a certainty that hummed quietly in his chest, that he would never again make the mistake of postponing his life. The accident had given him a second chance, a gift he had not earned but would not waste. He was no longer saving up for a future that might never come. He was living fully and imperfectly in the only time that any of us truly have, right now.